Thank you, Andy. That was really valuable. Um, I would love to see improvements to these types of forms. I was just saying in the chat, I actively hate them. And every time I fill one out, I see in my mind's eye every single entitled stranger who has ever asked me personal questions about my life history, background, ethnicity, everything, upon meeting me. So, for those of you who haven't got a chance already, go into the Q&A panel to kind of add in some questions on Andy's talk. But while you guys are pondering your questions, I'm going to jump in with one of my own questions, which is just that I can think of just so many reasons why somebody would struggle with filling out with one of these types of forms. So it felt like there's a lot of issues that you could really unpick with this, and which I felt must have been very difficult for you to manage in this project. So what was your kind of strategy for managing the variety of issues which somebody might have for dealing with this, while still keeping the scope of the work to a manageable level?
I think from the onset, we were empowered to have that broad scope to look at the entire ecosystem, not just the questionnaire. And I feel that was really lucky. I don't think that happens all the time. So the way in which the design approach worked, I think made that a bit more effective to get that breadth. And we had also had the right stakeholders in place to help us with the specific, like just for the questionnaire, each of those demographic questions, we knew like which groups to engage with and who were the subject matter experts, any people who had drafted policy that were supporting our new direction, such as in the gender context, we have a policy now in place that says, don't ask for sex unless you really need it, default to gender, and here's how to do it. So, validating that policy direction with the people who created that policy to make sure that it really was going to stand up in our context for self-ID. And I think the other thing that helped was that government goes really slow. So even when we were kind of moving on into different phases, we still ended up having time to refine with stakeholders, even if we were in that privacy phase. New groups, new employment equity group networks would form, especially in the context of religion. Religious minority groups started to convene. So we had some interventions there. So having a long process and being enabled to take a broad scope of the work, I think was how we were able to do it.
Yeah, I could agree with the kind of the slow pace of public sector. I think it's like, I feel like it's like reverse dog years, like one 5 years in public sector is like what equivalent to 1 year anywhere else. Okay, so question from Lizzie. So she asks, can I ask how you managed to bring the self-description field, that open-ended answer, and then trying to bring all those answers through to a statistical level, kind of managing that?
So it's going to be a long process before that data becomes like used for statistics. So we're taking like a minimum viable approach to using this data only internally to have a better compositional awareness, but also to see what we should use to improve the form. Like, are there things that people are consistently putting in there that we can use to justify changing the questionnaire and iterating? Things like veteran status was one thing that came up that we were like, we don't want to go with like an entire big bang and have a really long questionnaire with all this change right at the onset, but having this will kind of tell us employee readiness for certain questions to be on the form. We're also going to go through that process of starting to code those responses, which does take time. And hopefully while we're doing that, we can start to procure some technology that will help continue that base coding work and get us to a place where it could be statistics that we can share. But it's not going to happen right away. I think it'll be a journey to get to that stage.
Thank you. So next question from an anonymous asker. So they say, I've rarely seen UCD and behavioral insight teams work well together, but perhaps that's just my experience. In my experience, behavioral insight teams haven't taken our methods seriously, but organizations want to use behavioral insights to validate our findings. Is this collaboration common in your organization? Did you come by any challenges with this difference in discipline or learn anything valuable from your collaboration?
Yes. Such a good question. Thankfully, this is not common, by the way. I think this is the first time that I'm aware of that a single team was formed with these two disciplines. So thankfully, I think we got lucky that the practitioners did see the value of human-centered design and the limitations of using behavioral insights just on its own. I think there may have been still a bit of bias towards the lack of importance or validity or rigor with qualitative research, more so coming from the senior level enablers. So I think we just got a bit lucky in that case. But overall, I'd say in the government of Canada, there has been so much support for human centricity, especially in the context of diversity and inclusion. So I think we were more enabled than a lot of places, and a lot of trust was put on us to say, okay, you're the practitioners, you know how to do this, do it. We will listen to you and enable you. So I think we were really lucky.
Another question then from Magda. So during the co-design process, you mentioned teaching design thinking in the morning and doing the design in the afternoon. How did you find this approach? And is there anything that you would do differently next time?
I think the approach, it worked. This is actually how I learned design. In this applied way. So even through the lessons in the morning, you're starting to prepare, say if it's about interviews, in the activity that you're doing to learn, you're starting to build the question of the interview script that you're going to use in a few hours. So, and I think especially in those that kind of pre or primary research phase, we actually got them to interview each other. So they were their own research participants and research providers. So it was like extra learning. I think the prototypes, it's can be challenging to learn to prototype, but ultimately the essence of the ideas like still came through, and having the integration with the advisors really helped. There was one thing where some of the corporate partners I invited into the user research, they were maybe not the actual users, and influenced one of the prototypes in a way where I was like, I know who you've talked to. So I think I needed to be a bit more careful about, we should, for research, only the employment equity advisor panel would be probably more useful in this context to validate this information. But otherwise, 3 weeks I felt was a perfect amount of time to get the depth, to get the ideas, and to go through and have an iterative process.
Great, thank you. So next question. So this person says, I am really interested in the back-end aspect of this kind of work because it challenges the ways in which statisticians and sometimes social scientists in government want people to be knowable. When this butts it up against the ways people want to be able to identify themselves or be known to the state, what sort of conversations did that open up internally about bias or discrimination, if any? Related, were there any realizations about whether the organization even has the tools, tech processes for analyzing and organizing something like the free text responses?
Yeah, these are challenges that are ongoing. And I think it's in government, having all of the answers figured out first, you're never going to get started. So as I mentioned, like the interventions from our statistics organizations happened at points and happened at the final juncture where perhaps it would have been more ideal for them to inform us and involve us a little bit more in their process. But there's that, to that earlier question, seeing the validity of the approach that we're doing is maybe not shared across, an organization that's fully dedicated to statistics in this way. At the same time, we are building our capacity for governance and establishing that where I work in the Treasury Board, we actually are the decision makers when it comes to data standards and our strategies. It's a bit of a shift culturally. So there's a broader kind of change process that's going on to really get our governance and the ways in which we make decisions about standards going forward. And same with the technology aspect of it. Sometimes we have to, by what we decide to kind of go and release something without having, say, like a qualitative text analytics tool procured to do it. Once we have the first step and we've proven the value, then we can say, look, we need this thing. And that's going to get us the buy-in to get to the next step. So it's maybe not ideal. We're not just going to be all ready as soon as we launch. It's going to be perfect. Like this is just not how it works in government, sadly. We kind of have to create the need by going forward in an imperfect way.
Yeah, I think so. It's like if you build it, they will come kind of thinking.
When it comes to the internal corporate enabling people, not for the
Yes, yeah. Okay, last question then. Do you think that the open fields and coding them could one day help make new options for people to choose from that is more inclusive? Or do you think that will always be too complex and personal to have it as a tick box exercise?
No, that's the goal, is to learn from what people, or not the only goal, but a key goal is to learn what people are inputting to help us iterate on the questionnaire. But I also see that in the future, like if we think about the powers of AI, could this questionnaire just be entirely a free form option? I don't think we're anywhere close to that, but as we go and we start to build those capabilities for analyzing those open text fields, I see a future where doing this will be, we will be more empowered to just by default identify in our own words. That's my hope anyway.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Andee, for sharing your experiences with us on this project. So if you guys would like to continue the conversation, and if you have any more questions for Andee, you remember that you can always go to our Slack. So especially the reflections channel in the Slack, if you haven't checked it out, this is where we post follow-up questions on all the kind of sessions, and also so any sessions where there have been additional questions or people haven't been able to answer them all, we post them all there. We post kind of questions from our community sessions, previous community sessions. So you can kind of check those out and see if you have any thoughts that you'd like to share. So after this, there are still 2 workshops in the evening for people who are kind of continuing on, if you've registered for those. Remember to, if you are not attending the workshop, to let us know so that we can let somebody else take your spot, because there's lots of people who are dying to get into the workshops. But thank you everyone for joining us on this for the 4th day of Magnify, last one this week. We will resume on Monday with a program of talks about workplace inclusion, where our speakers will be sharing practical advice on creating more supportive environments for everyone at work, from recruitment practices all the way to handling complaints. So it's very hands-on stuff. We will also have a panel discussion where we will be hearing from designers and researchers who are neurodivergent, who will be sharing their experiences and kind of tips for navigating the workplace and how to make the workplace more supportive for neurodivergent people. So check it out. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank y'all.
Bye.